Well, the spooky season has come and gone, and I have read a lot of books this month for Halloween, and I want to talk to you guys about all of them. Hey guys, welcome back to 115 Reading. My name is Ethan, and let's talk about some spooky books. First up on my list for what I read this month, this has kind of been a bucket list item as far as reading goes, because I bought this book all the way back, I think, when I was in high school, or maybe it was middle school, I don't remember. And I started to read it, got like 10 pages in, put it down, never picked it back up, but always wanted to read it. And that's because I'm a massive fan of the movie adaptation of this book. And so this year I finally decided to take the plunge and actually give it an honest go. And I finally finished it. And that book is The Prestige by Christopher Priest. So, like I said, I'm a huge fan of the Prestige movie adaptation by Christopher Nolan. It is one of my all time favorite movies. I've seen it so many times, I could gush for hours about that movie. And likewise, I've had this book for, I think, almost an entire decade now, and I keep meaning to getting around to reading the whole thing, and I just never did. Back when I was in high school, I loved the movie, and then I picked up the book, and the book, at the very beginning of the book anyway, was so immediately different that I think it kind of turned me off a little bit, so I put the book down. But this year, I don't know what it was. I just wanted to read something that gave me kind of autumn vibes. And The Prestige has always kind of given me a little bit of autumn vibes and a little bit of spooky vibes, to be honest. Not like full on horror or anything at all, just slightly, like slight undertones of spooky. And so I decided to read The Prestige. And I'm glad I did. This book was really good. I came away from the book feeling like I one, I loved the book, but two, it made me respect the movie adaptation so much more because there is a lot of big differences between the book and the movie. But what I love about these two is that I feel like both of these stories tackle the same story idea, the same story concept that is two rival magicians in London in the 1800s. And I feel like both mediums uh, told their version of the story best in the way that it suited their medium the best, is what I mean. So I feel like the version of the story that takes place in the movie works really well for a movie, and the version of the story that takes place in the book works really well for a book. So the movie uses a lot of nonlinear editing and like framing and editing trickery to kind of hide its magician secrets. And the book uses this really cool unreliable narration because this is a book that is I think it's an epistolary book, so it takes place in journal entries and letters and things like that, and it uses that unreliable narration to keep its secrets going in different ways, and it's really cool. I realize I've now been talking about the difference between the book and the movie. I want to talk about the book. The book is really cool. The book is actually even spookier than the movie, which is not something I was expecting. The final couple of chapters of this do have some really good spooks, some really good haunting vibes, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the characters in this one. Both of the main characters in this book kind of suck. they're both jerks, and I didn't like either of them. And I'm keeping being very very vague about this specifically because if you haven't read The Prestige or watched The Prestige, I think you should go in blind and not know anything like I did when I watched the movie for the first time. All you need to know is it's about warring stage magicians who have a rivalry. And if that doesn't sound fun to you, I mean I don't know what to tell you. This book is really cool. I don't know whether you should read the book or watch the movie first. Doesn't really matter to me. I think both are good entry points. I think both are really good versions of the story, and I could talk about both of them forever. But I can't do it without getting into spoilers. So this is a wrap up video. So this is beyond the scope of this particular video. But all to say that the Prestige book was really cool, and it was a totally different experience than I thought, and it was spookier than I thought. And it also, once again, what's really interesting is that the book in the way that it has a different narrative structure because it has this modern day component to it that's framing the journals. It actually changes the themes of the book in very interesting ways to that of the movie. So whereas the movie very focuses on things about obsession and how it controls your life, and revenge and how that can ruin your life as well, the book still tackles obsession and revenge, but it takes it further and expands its scope, and it becomes about how obsession and revenge trickles down and doesn't just affect your immediate life, it affects your descendants. And so we get that sweet, sweet theme of generational trauma that's brought in, and that's present in the book and it's not present in the movie. So some really interesting stuff here. I like both versions of the story, and I think you should read it. It's great. All right, next up, this is the first, I think, issue you consider first proper Halloween, proper full-on spooky read. And this is me recently trying to cover what I feel are some of my literary blind spots. And I think some of my literary blind spots are definitely classics in classic literature. And so for that reason, I read Frankenstein for the first time by Mary Shelley. Obviously, this book is one of the most iconic and classic horror books of all time, and I think it deserves it. So this is a really good book. I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't until after I finished this book that I learned that there are two versions of Frankenstein: the original 1818 text and like a revised edition that came out in like 1830 or something like that. I think I have the revised edition, which is unfortunate. I did not read the original version, so whenever I read this next, I'll make sure that I have to go and get the 1818 version. This is just the version that my wife had. So Frankenstein, we all know the story of Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein ends up animating life into a dead corpse that he has constructed, and the monster comes to life, and then spooky stuff ensues. So this book is interesting. I really enjoyed this. I thought thematically there was a lot of really cool stuff going on in this book, and I feel like I could talk about it for a while. I wish I had somebody to really discuss this and get in the weeds with, but I thought there were some really interesting themes going on here. There's a lot of shockingly, I wasn't expecting this. A lot of religious imagery going on here. I feel like that Victor. There's a lot of stuff being explored here about Victor being a creator and the monster being his creation, and how the way Victor responds to his creation, what that does to the monster's mindset. So I think there's like some religious imagery in here that you could use this as an allegory between a god and his creation. But I also think you could use this as a story about parenthood, about abusive parents or neglectful parents, and how that affects their descendants. And there's just a lot of stuff in here. I mean, we could talk about hubris. We could talk about I could talk about the character of Victor Frankenstein all the time. This man is so funny because he creates all of his own problems and then spends the whole book crying and being depressed because he has all of these problems, and it's like he never really reckons with the fact that he is the reason all these bad things are happening to him, and he is always constantly blaming other people or other things instead of himself, and he never really confronts the fact that like his decisions are the reason that all the bad things are happening. And Victor is egotistical, and he's blind to his faults, and he can't take responsibility, and he's also really stupid in this book. So much of this book is Victor making the stupidest decisions you could possibly make and then being shocked when it blows up in his face. Something that's interesting is I didn't find this book scary. There were some spookies and some haunts going on, but I found this a lot more interesting from a perspective of perspective of just like thinking about the themes that it's discussing, parenthood, divinity, stuff like that. Like I really enjoyed that stuff way more, and just kind of like thinking about that and dwelling upon those things, or the theme about how we other people who don't fit our standards or don't look like us, all those things. I enjoyed it from that perspective more than way more than I enjoyed it from this was very spooky. So I tried to read this at night to get that maximum spooky factor, and it wasn't really that spooky. There are a couple of spooky images, but I think this is more of a thematically rich book that you enjoy studying and thinking about than it is a book that you read because it's fun and spooky, although there certainly is a little bit of spooks in there. So yeah, I really enjoyed Frankenstein. I definitely can see myself reading this again. So yeah, that's Frankenstein. Next time I read it, I'm hopefully going to read the original version, and I'll get to see how it compares. But I really enjoyed this one. So next up, I wanted to continue my train of horror classics, and this is why I decided to read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And man, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. First, I feel like it is important to know that I'm a huge fan of the Mike Flanagan Netflix series of The Haunting of Hill House. And I knew for a fact, I knew this going into the book, that the book is nothing like, plot-wise, is nothing like the book. So I'm going to say some negative to mixed things about this book, but it's not because I was expecting a version of the Netflix series and to get that. I knew for a fact that this is completely different. And I was totally cool with that. I was totally excited about it. But I don't think I really like this book at all, unfortunately. This one was a complete and total miss for me, and I've been thinking a lot about why that is, and I'm not really sure. There are some good things going for this book. Firstly, this book is spookier than Frankenstein. Like the descriptions of Hill House itself and like its weird architecture and some of the subtle things going on, I thought were really nice and really spooky and creepy. I liked that stuff. I think psychologically too, there's a lot of interesting stuff with the main character going on here that I don't think I fully reckoned with until I was talking with a friend about this afterward. But on the whole, and I also like the setup of this book. that these characters are purposely going into a place that they know is haunted, specifically with the purpose of triggering haunting things so they can study the haunting things. I just think that's cool. I don't know why. I just really like that setup. The thing, here's what's really weird. I came away from this book feeling confused more than anything else and stupid and wondering and just had more questions than anything. And it's not in the sense of, oh, it's mysterious and unexplained and vague and ambiguous. Not that kind of confused like I don't understand the basics of characters and their motivations and why they behave the way they did. And I think I can't tell if I'm missing something, and so I came away feeling stupid confused, not fun confused. So this book is written in, I think it's the 1950s, something along there, the 50s or the 60s, 1959, I think. And I'm just gonna be honest. I think as I've been thinking about this book, I think what really confused me about this is that the writing style and the characters were obviously, outdated. I think outdated is like a negative connotation. It's obviously not what I'm used to, but it was in a way that I couldn't tell when something weird happened in this book. And by something weird, I mean like a character said a weird line of dialogue, or a character thought something, or reacted to something. I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be confused by certain character interactions, or if I just didn't understand them because I didn't live in the 1950s, and there's like, culturally and socially, I don't understand how people spoke and acted back then. Does that make sense? So characters in this just really, really confused me, like on a basic level. On a scene to scene, almost sometimes line to line level, characters would just say things that I just thought were really weird and unexplained. And then they would do things that I thought were really weird and unexplained. And I couldn't tell if, oh, they're doing that weird thing because psychologically Hill House is messing with them, or they're doing that weird thing because, oh, this would actually be normal if I was reading this in the 50s, but I'm not in the 50s, and so like culturally this seems really bizarre to me. I couldn't tell the difference between those two, and so I walked away feeling really confused about basic stuff as far as the characters go. I do know this: if I could give one major compliment to this book, later in the book, one of the main characters' wives shows up to Hill House, Miss Montague. She's the best character in the book. She's so funny. She cracked me up. I was so close to DNFing this book, to be honest. And then she showed up and injected some life into the story and some humor. I loved her addition to the story. Unfortunately, she shows up like in the last like 30 pages or so is what it feels like. Also, I will say the other thing that kept me going is that this book is insanely short. And so I read it. Well, normally I would have read it much quicker, but I was having a hard time getting through it. So it did take me like a week. But if I was like really into this, I think I could have read it in one sitting, to be honest. And that's great too. I like that this book was so brief. So yeah, Haunting of Hill House was a whiff for me. I think the mixture of the writing not being what I'm used to, and the characters being really weird and doing unexplained things, really threw me off. And maybe that's the point. I don't know. Again, like I can't tell if this is why I'm always a little nervous when I read a classic book, because I can't tell if something confuses me if it's a normal thing, like it's just a cultural thing that I don't understand anymore, or if it's supposed to be weird. I can't tell sometimes when I read old books, and this is like a good example of that. So yeah, this was like a total whiff for me, unfortunately. Even though it's a classic and people, hold this in such high regard, I really, really did not enjoy this at all on my read experience. Okay, next up, I decided I wanted to, after being mega confused after reading Haunting of Hill House, I wanted to read something that I knew I would love and that would be more cozy, and that would, that I knew looking at the cover felt like it would be a nice autumn read. And so I decided to read some more Robin Hobb. Yes, I read The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince. This is a short little novella that explains the history of the six duchies and their history with the Witted. And it explains how the Witted was introduced into the Farseer bloodline, and also what events began back in history that we know eventually cascaded and turned into the bigotry and oppression of the Witted people as we see it when we enter the Farseer trilogy. So this book has two halves. It is written it's kind of written in first person because it's this one woman who is recounting the tale as she heard it from her son, and also what she experienced it. And it's very short, but it spans a long period of time, like a couple decades in the history of the six duchies. And dude, this was so good. Oh my goodness, I love this so much. So what I loved about this book is one, and this has to be said, is it's really short. And this is very cool for me because, as you can see here, here's my Robin Hobb collection. I was starting to get a little worried that Robin Hobb can't write anything without it being like 1,000 pages, because these books are all huge books. I mean, starting with Royal Assassin, it's always 600 plus pages, and starting from Assassin's Quest, it feels like all these are about 800 pages plus long. And I think Assassin's Fate, which I haven't gotten to the final trilogy yet, I think this might be an 1,000 page book. I don't know, I'll have to check. So even though I love Robin Hobb and I love her writing and I love her characters, sometimes, I look at her book, and even though I'm really excited, like I can't wait to get into the final two series here, I know it's going to be a huge commitment because the books are really, really long. And I always wondered, can she write, succinctly, briefly? And I'm happy to report that, yeah, when she wants to, Robin Hobb can write something just as amazing, even with only, how many pages? Only 150 pages this book is. And I read this, I think, in like a day. And it totally gripped me. And even though, we're not living with these characters in a slice of life context like we often get with these books, right? Like, especially in the Fitz books, you really get a slice of life quality where you are experiencing Fitz's day-to-day life all the time. And I started to wonder, like, is that why we love Fitz so much? Is because we just spend so much time with him doing all this stuff? But no, you can care about characters in a fraction of that time. Robin Hobb is actually just a really good writer, and I'm just stupid for ever doubting, because this thing is great. You explore some really complicated relationships between the narrator and the princess that she serves her whole life, which cascades into a story about the princess's children and the narrator's child, and how those two children, how they develop a complex relationship, and then how that complex relationship, based on the naughty stuff that happened in the first half, how it spirals out into this rivalry, and then how a simple rivalry can turn into full on oppression and murder and like all these things. It's so fascinating how this book is able to explore some of these really crazy, really emotional storylines and concepts in just such a short page time. A lot of great stuff. Check this out if you haven't read it. If you're a fan of The Realm of the Elderlings, again, you can read it in like an afternoon because it's so short and it's so good. And there is a moment at the very end that is both very emotionally impactful and also kind of a hype moment. Like the final line of this book got me like really hyped, which is really funny. But man, I will say this one last thing about The Willful Princess and The Piebald Prince. If any of Robin Hobb's books ever get adapted to become a movie, I want this to be the first one. All right, next up, I'm continuing my train of reading some classics. And so I decided to read, on the suggestion of my friend, I decided to read my first Ray Bradbury book, and I decided to read Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is a story about a dark carnival that comes to haunt a small town. And these two boys get caught up in this haunted carnival. So, man, I know that Ray Bradbury is such an iconic author, and I know his books. I know everybody loves them, and they're masterpieces, all that good stuff. And I'm just gonna sound like an idiot, honestly. Like, oh, you didn't get The Haunting of Hill House, you didn't get Something Wicked This Way Comes. And it makes me, again, I feel really dumb, but I'm just gonna say it. I think this book is a good story, but it is buried under impenetrable prose. The writing style in this book is so flowery and so metaphorical, and so often that while this is a simple story, you will often be scratching your head confused about what on earth you just read. Everything in this book is written with a metaphorical language, with a super flowery language. Nothing is ever simple. Somebody can be looking at a leaf and it's described for a page in this metaphorical language. I'll give you an example. There's this mirror maze at this haunted carnival, and something is spooky about the mirror maze. And these two boys are talking to this, I think it's this teacher of theirs or a neighbor, and she decides she wants to go into the mirror maze. And there's this spooky thing that happens in the mirror maze. I could not tell you what physically happened in this chapter because Bradbury decided to describe the mirror maze using the metaphor of the ocean. So he talks about the mirror maze as an ocean of glass waves and people getting sucked into the current of the water, and the waves are batting people around and controlling them and pulling them in, and this woman has to be rescued from the ocean from being drowned, and so she sticks a hand out of the ocean, and the boys have to grab her and rescue her without getting pulled in themselves. And it's this really intense descriptive language about this violent ocean. um, and I'm left wondering, all right, that's a cool picture, it's a cool image, I guess, but what actually happened? Was she just standing at the entrance of the mirror maze and was just looking in and got freaked out and they pulled her back? Was she standing a little bit inside the mirror maze and stuck her hand out the door, but you could just see her because she's standing right there in the mirror maze? Like, what actually physically happened? What physically happened with the mirror maze? I couldn't tell you because Bradbury doesn't tell you, because it's all metaphor. Everything is metaphor. All the language is metaphor. And it just didn't quite work for me. There are moments where it works. There are moments that I love. There are moments where the language gives you the vibe that I think Bradbury is going for. And then there are other moments where I'm like, I think for this scene you could have dropped the metaphor. I think for this scene you could just write, a basic functional scene. But Bradbury doesn't. But also because language is so flowery, I think this is a pretty short book, but it felt longer because everything is so, the descriptions are so drawn out all the time. I will say this about the book. I think the second half is leagues better than the first half. The first half is so slow. It could also just be that the first half is where I was reckoning with the writing style the most. And by the second half, I was kind of used to it, and I could kind of fall into the story by the second half. But I also think the second half is just cooler. There's some more spooky stuff happening, with, like, this character, this young little girl character they find, that I don't want to spoil because that's like a really spooky moment. The second half is also where the story really kicks off between one of the main characters and their dad, and I thought that was actually a very emotionally impactful story. I really liked the relationship that's explored between the main character and their dad. I loved that angle, and I also liked some of the thematic stuff that's explored in this. The stuff that's explored about seasons of life, and how sometimes when you're young, all you want to do is become older, and sometimes when you're older, all you're doing is missing the stuff that you didn't get to do when you were younger, and how how there's always something good at each part of life that you're in, and you should enjoy it while it lasts. I love that stuff because you have younger characters here that just want to skip life and not experience it because they just want to go ahead and become older. And then you have some older characters here that are stuck in a rut because they feel like they wasted their childhood years and they'll never get those back. And there's a cool concept here at this carnival that plays into this theme as well that I thought was really cool. Like, all that stuff I thought was great and awesome when you can see it through the brick wall that is the prose of this book. All right, finally, I read one last book to wrap up Halloween season, and that was the classic of Stephen King's The Shining. And I gotta say, I was pretty nervous going into this one because I had just read Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I didn't really love it. I know this is a lot more modern than any of these books because this is like the 80s or the 70s, I think. But I haven't read a lot of Stephen King. I think the only King I've read is I've tried to read Misery a couple times because it sounded like a really good concept. And I don't know what it is about Misery. I've tried to start that book 2 times, and maybe I'm just not in the right headspace, but I always get about 50 pages in and I've dropped Misery and I've never continued it. And it's made me not want to pick up any Stephen King, even though I know he's a popular author. But I don't know. I saw this cover at Target. It was on sale. I really liked this cover. And I thought, you know what? I'll give The Shining a go. Because another reason I wanted to give The Shining a go is that I don't love the Shining movie by Stanley Kubrick, and I know that the Stephen King does not like the Shining movie by Stanley Kubrick, even though a lot of people love that movie. And so I kind of wanted to see why the author didn't like this movie that is so iconic in the history of film and cinema. And after reading it, I can say I totally get it. This book has a total different vibe from the movie. The movie is more of a thriller, like a psychological thriller, and the book is more of a tragedy. The book is more, it's a tragedy about a family. It's a tragedy about a man suffering from, well, not suffering from addiction, who is trying to break his addiction and his addictive, abusive cycle, and how he succumbs to his addiction again, and how it breaks his family. And it's all, so the haunting at the hotel is all a metaphor for how addiction can control you, right? And how addiction can cause you to do horrible things like abuse your wife and abuse your child, or how you could become a version of yourself that you can't control, which is why the hotelness is so cool, because it's like a metaphor for all that stuff. And so this book to me was so much more sad than it was scary. There are some spooks in this, but this book is really, really sad. This is a book about a man trying to beat his addiction and failing. This is a man who is trying to better himself for his family and failing. And that was really sad to me. And the movie, the movie doesn't have that really. The movie one cuts out like a lot of this. There's a huge amount of context before the characters even get to the hotel, and there's a lot of history that's explored with the characters and their backstory. Movie cuts all that, goes straight to the hotel right at the beginning. There are allusions to some of the context that are present in the book, but the way it's portrayed in the movie, I think, does the story a disservice. And also, it makes, I think, the point a little muddled or unclear. Whereas the book makes it very like it's not subtext. It is very like boom. It's not this book is not subtle. It's very in your face. It's very this is the theme. This is the metaphor. This is what's going on. Now be sad. And I was sad. I was very sad reading this book because the writing is on the wall from the beginning, and you know that that it's not going to work out for the characters, and you know the character is gonna succumb to his addiction, and it's gonna be really sad. And it was that. Yeah, I really like this book. The vibes of this were probably the spookiest out of all the books I read this year. The themes were on point. The metaphor, good use of metaphor. The writing style, I also just found this really easy to read, unlike Misery for some reason. I don't know why I struggle specifically with that book so much, but this book proved to me that, okay, yeah, I can like Stephen King. Oh yeah, I also forgot that I read the first two books of The Dark Tower back in high school. I actually completely forgot that. So I thought that this was my first real Stephen King, but that's not true. I had read a little bit of The Dark Tower. But this is the first Stephen King that I really loved, you know, and I loved that the characters were so well realized and they were so fleshed out, and there was so much page time given to them and their inner thoughts. I understood them so much, and the movie doesn't have any of that. The movie's got some spooky imagery. The movie's got some good moments, but the heart of this story is not present in that movie. The movie is good in its own right. I respect Kubrick's vision of that movie, but this is for me, this is the real deal. This was so much better than the movie. It was so much sadder, and it was spookier, I think, than the movie. And so, you know, I guess it is interesting to me that I just realized that I have two books in this wrap up that are specifically to do with comparing a book and its adaptation. But I just thought I just think it's interesting. I think I agree with Stephen King on the issue of The Shining. I think his book is better than the movie because I think its characters are more well rounded. I think its themes are more clear. I think it's scarier in places, but I definitely think it's just sadder. It's just sadder than the movie. The movie's not sad. And so I already ordered the sequel, Doctor Sleep. I'm excited to read that because I have watched the Doctor Sleep movie and I do love that movie. I liked that movie more than the Shining movie, and maybe I'll do a video on Doctor Sleep and its adaptation. We'll see. I don't know, but yeah, The Shining was a resounding success for me. I ate up this book in a couple days. I loved it. I loved the characters. It made me tear up in some instances. It made me just kind of. There were a couple times where I just kind of had to put the book down and just let out a sigh because I was either stressed or I was just really sad. And there was just this book is just really heavy all around. So yes, if you haven't read The Shining, you should definitely check it out. I think it was really good. All right, guys, that is my Halloween reads for this month, which is why I hadn't made a couple videos in a couple weeks because I've just been reading a lot of spooky books. Some good ones, some not good ones, some mixed ones, which is pretty pretty usual, right? What am I reading right now? I am finally starting my reread of Disquiet Gods, which is perfectly timed because Shadows Upon Time comes out in 2 weeks, and you better believe a video on Disquiet Gods and a video on Shadows Upon Time will be coming when those drop, as well as I was planning on doing a reread of The Will of the Many before The Strength of the Few came out, but I don't think I'm gonna have time for that anymore. So we will see, but you can maybe expect a video about The Will of the Many and The Strength of the Few when those come out. And you can definitely expect a video on Brigands and Bread Knives when that comes out. Maybe I'll do a quick reread of Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bone Dust. A lot of books are coming out in November, so we'll see if I can get to them all and get videos of them all. But until then, guys, I hope you enjoyed my Halloween wrap up, and until next time, see ya.